When you're just getting started with learning how to sew, it can be really intimidating to go out and purchase fabric. And in today's episode, I really want to give you some options and suggestions on how to get started as inexpensively as possible so that you have a lot of fabric choices at your disposal. Because fabric can be such an expense, it really can. I feel like it's important to have awareness of options that can save you money in the long run. And the goal here is to get good at sewing. When you enter a fabric store and you see all of the selections ahead of you, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of different types of fibers and knit fabrics, and there's just so much to get to know that the options just seem like so much. And I think that we really need to narrow our window when we get started with sewing to make things so much easier on ourselves so that we pick the fabric that's going to be the easiest to work with, that's going to give us great results, and that's going to be the least expensive. If you're new to my series, you can go back and watch my other episodes. I have an episode all about picking patterns and picking the right patterns when you're just getting started with sewing. But when you pick a pattern, it's going to recommend to you specific fabrics that are going to work well with this project. When you're getting started with sewing, I think it's so important to stay away from any kind of stretch fabrics. I think it's also a mistake to start with patterns or any kind of ginghams or anything like that. We really want to pick solid colors because they're going to be the absolute easiest to work with. And if you make any kind of mistakes in the cutting or anything like that, it's going to show up a lot less than if you do a stripe or a pattern. I've definitely purchased fabric online and at the fabric store, and I've also thrifted fabric. But number one is the cost. The cost by the meter is really expensive. It can cost you more to sew something than it will to actually just go out and buy a piece of clothing. And that's really the downside of sewing and learning how to sew, is just the cost of the fabric can just be so absorbently expensive that it's just a really big turnoff. And one of the goals in my series is to make sewing fun and not feel like it's going to cost you an absolute fortune. So when I started sewing, I have already told this story in one of my previous videos, but I went out and I purchased a whole bunch of linen fabric because I just had this dream of having a linen wardrobe, everything in my closet being linen, and me just feeling like $1,000,000. And I spent several $100s on linen. I absolutely love linen fabric. It's beautiful. It's so breathable. It gets softer with every wash. I still to this day love linen and plan on purchasing more linen for my wardrobe. When I got started with sewing and I bought this linen fabric, I don't think I quite had the skills just yet to know exactly what would look good on my body, nor the skills to produce a quality piece of clothing that I was going to love for years to come. I ended up donating quite a bit of the linen pieces that I made because I made some mistakes with things that just didn't look good on my body type. My end result was okay and they were wearable, but I just feel like they weren't the most flattering on me. And I feel like I've gained so many skills over time by purchasing less expensive fabric and really working on my skills. And so that's where I really want to get you to in this video, is letting you know the cheapest fabric you can get that's going to give you good results and that's going to give you a lot of fabric to work with so that you can actually play around, make mistakes, or make pieces that you really like. One of the things that I learned by reading a lot of sewing books is that one of the things that experienced sewers will do is they will make a muslin of the outfit that they want to create, and they'll use a cheaper fabric to do the muslin. And it's called a muslin, but they actually use a muslin fabric. And that way they can make it and see how it fits on them and make some adjustments to the outfit before they actually create it with their end result fabric. And that way they don't make the mistakes on the good fabric. They can do it on the muslin first. And so when I learned that, I decided to give that a try. But when I went to the sewing store, the price of the muslin was still kind of over my budget for just something that I was going to throw out. And so that's what really got me started with going to my thrift store and looking for fabric there. And what I ended up purchasing, using, and loving was sheets. I've seen a lot of other YouTube videos where people make outfits out of sheets, and it is actually such a great option. And I'm going to highly recommend that you try this because you get so much fabric in a sheet. If you think about the size of a queen or king size sheet versus buying fabric by the meter at your sewing store, the cost of one sheet's worth of fabric is going to be so expensive to purchase if you just purchased this fabric. And it would never come in the width of a sheet. So you just get so much fabric, and it's really going to give you a lot of room to learn and grow and play, because I can buy a queen or king size sheet at my thrift store for about $3, and I can buy a whole set for about $6. That's going to give me enough fabric to do a whole dress, a whole nightgown, and I don't have to worry about waste of fabric like I do if I purchase by the meter. Because if you purchase by the meter at your fabric store, you really have to be careful about the placement of each pattern piece and its positioning to get the most use out of that fabric without any waste, because any waste is costing you money. Whereas if you use a sheet, one sheet is just going to give you so much fabric. I've used sheets so much in my sewing, and I've really learned to love it, because it might seem strange to you, the idea of sewing with a sheet, but at the end of the day, it's just fabric. And a lot of sheets come in 100% cotton. One of the nightgowns that I made was 100% Egyptian cotton. And I couldn't believe when I found that. I was so excited. There are so many different colors of sheets that you can find. You can find bamboo sheets. Sometimes you can find linen sheets if you're lucky. But a majority of the time they're going to be cotton. And cotton is a natural material. And just like linen, it's going to be breathable and comfortable to wear. And there's a lot of things that you can make out of a 100% cotton fabric that I really think it's a great resource. Now, I have a few tips for you if you decide to do this and go to your thrift store and look for sheets. I'm always on the lookout for sheets, and I have some tips of what to look for and what to avoid when you're purchasing thrifted sheets. So when I go to my thrift store and I'm looking for thrifted sheets, I'm always looking for thrifted fabric too. But one of the downsides of thrifted fabric is that, number one, you don't really know what kind of fabric it is. There's no tag on it to let you know if it's a synthetic fabric, if it's a natural fabric. And you also are limited by the amount of fabric that you get. At my thrift store, a lot of the fabric pieces that are there are usually 1.5 meters, maybe 2 meters. But I'm not usually going to find enough fabric used to make an entire dress, because usually it's someone's leftovers. So that's that's something to consider when you're looking for thrifted fabric, is you're kind of limited to the amount and you don't really know exactly what kind of fabric you're working with. When you're purchasing used sheets, there's always going to be a tag that tells you the fabric content as well as washing instructions. And that's super important to know, because if you decide that you want to dye the fabric, you know whether it's synthetic or natural. It's just really nice to have that information. So when I'm looking at sheets and I decide what I want to buy for a sewing project, they have to look brand new. They have to look in great condition. I don't want to buy anything that looks used, old, and gross, obviously. It's got to look fresh and fairly untouched, really. So obviously you're going to look at it and inspect that there's no obvious color changes. The color of everything looks really good. There's no pilling or any sign of wear on the fabric. And I also like to feel the fabric. And I want to judge, is this something that's going to feel good on my skin? Sometimes sheets can feel really stiff, and it's not necessarily something that would feel good against my skin. And then another thing I like to stay away from is something like microfiber sheets. I really don't like microfiber anything. I stay away from microfiber when it comes to towels, cleaning towels, sheets. I just don't like microfiber. And so that's something that I avoid when I'm looking at sheets. And usually places like Walmart sell a lot of microfiber sheets because they're really cheap. It's a really cheap fabric. So I like to stick with cotton or something that feels high quality. Of course, you have to consider the color of the fabric. Is this something that I would wear if I found this color on an item of clothing? And you also have to think about your own personal coloring and if this color is going to look good on you. So you have to consider it the same way that you would with any other fabric. And then the other consideration is sometimes a sheet will have a bit of a sheen to it. This one does. And it's kind of a satiny looking sheet. Like it is 100% cotton, but it's got a little bit of a sheen to it. And I think this could look beautiful on a dress. The first time I ever bought a sheet for sewing, it was really just to create a muslin for that project that I wanted to sew. But I soon realized those benefits of sewing with such a huge piece of fabric and how inexpensive it was for me to get my hands on a lot of material. So I'm always working on my sewing stash. I'm always trying to find more fabrics that I love that I will just tuck away until the time comes that I want to use it for a project. And I really just think sheets are such a valuable resource in order to get your hands on a lot of material quickly to get started with sewing at a really cheap price. But if you're grossed out by the idea of sheets and that just doesn't jive with you, that's fine. There's no problem, and it's just going to cost you a little bit more of an investment to get started. So my recommendations when you're picking your first pattern and you're picking your first project, first of all, you want it to be something that you're excited about, that you want to wear, and you really do want those good final results. But you want sort of a beginner pattern that's not going to have a lot of really hard things for you to accomplish, like buttonholes I would stay away from. And you want to build your skills over time. Staying away from knits, staying away from patterns. Definitely don't start with those fabrics. Make it easy on yourself. Start with a solid color. in something that has no stretch to it. Keep in mind your finished result, what you want to wear, the coloring, does it go with you? Is it flattering? And ultimately, it's going to be a learning experience. Personally, I have learned to love sewing with sheets because I feel like I have really advanced my sewing skills so much quicker just having access to a large volume of fabric and being able to have enough fabric to do any project that I want. It's not going to work for everything. You know, it's not heavy enough of a fabric to maybe do a pant with, or even a skirt. You want a little bit of a heavier fabric unless it's a summer skirt. It's really going to benefit you to get your hands on something like that. So I really recommend that when you're getting started. So I really wanted to simplify things for you in today's video and just let you know what you're going to get the best results with when you're starting out with your first projects. Once you've got your fabric picked out, you're going to want to go to the sewing store and pick out some thread that matches your fabric as closely as possible. And if you have to decide between a darker thread or a lighter thread, always go with the lighter. I think it's really important to bring a little piece of fabric with you so that you can find the right thread. So what I would do is I would just cut a little piece of this off on the corner, and I would just take a little swatch of this with you when you go to the sewing store. You want to get a big enough roll of thread for your project. I usually don't go for the smallest size. I usually go for the medium size. And I usually go with a Gutermann's thread. That's usually what I find at my sewing store, and they have a lot of color options. And one of the reasons why you want a coordinating color of thread for sure is because you're not going to see the mistakes if you make them. It's going to just blend in with the fabric. And if you were to use a contrasting thread like white on a dark material, you're really going to see every single stitch. So I wouldn't recommend that unless you're going for that look. And I would only recommend it once you get a little bit better at sewing. I really hope this video gives you some ideas to make sewing easy on yourself. And of course, ultimately, it's totally up to you what you buy and what you decide to do. But this is just from my experience, what's worked for me and what's allowed me to sew on a tight budget. Because if I went and bought brand new material for each project, I think that I just wouldn't be able to afford to sew. And so I have had to purchase the sheets sort of out of a necessity, to be honest with you, because I just can't afford to go buy fabric by the meter right now. It's just not within my means or my budget. If you're new to my channel, this is the Handmade Wardrobe series. It is a limited series that I'm only going to be doing for a period of time right now until our farm picks up, and then I'm going to be too busy to continue this series. But I will add to it over time. For now, I plan on taking you through enough to get started with your first projects, and I really want to help guide you on your way to getting started and giving you all the information that took me several years to learn. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in next week's video.